at nytimes.com/thedaily. That's it for the Daily. I'm Michael Barbaro. See you on Monday.
This is Asian View from NHK World Japan. I'm Yoshio Ogasawara. Sources say struggling Japanese conglomerate Toshiba has accepted a buyout offer from an investment fund that wants to take the company private. Japan Industrial Partners has proposed a complete takeover of the firm. This will be done through financing from a group of Japanese firms and loans from major banks. Toshiba has been in turmoil since it was hit by an accounting scandal in 2015 that led to a series of resignations by company presidents. Toshiba accepted investment from activist shareholders from outside Japan aimed at rebuilding its finances. Taiwan is recalling its ambassador to Honduras. This comes as the Central American nation moves to normalize relations with Beijing. Honduras is one of 14 countries that have diplomatic ties with Taiwan. Honduran Foreign Minister Eduardo Enrique Reina reportedly left for China on Wednesday to hold talks with officials. Taiwan's foreign ministry responded by recalling its ambassador. It says Honduras has totally disregarded the assistance Taipei has provided the country for many years. China says Taiwan is a part of its territory. Beijing has been trying to put pressure on the island by persuading nations to sever diplomatic ties. Young people in North Korea have shown their support for the regime in a rally in the nation's capital. The demonstration was held on Wednesday as the U.S. and South Korea held a joint military exercise. The ruling Workers' Party newspaper said students were among the demonstrators. State-run media say more than 1.4 million young people have volunteered to join or rejoin the military. We're broadcasting from NHK in Tokyo.
Marketplace is supported by Progressive. Progressive Commercial Insurance offers personalized rates and customizable coverages for your business vehicles. More at progressivecommercial.com.
All right, I'm just going to say it. Is there another banking shoe to drop? From American Public Media, this is Marketplace.
Marketplace is supported by McDermott, Will, and Emery, lawyers passionately working to help clients tackle their biggest challenges today in pursuit of their boldest vision of tomorrow. More at MWE.com.
In Los Angeles, I'm Kai Rizal. It is Friday today, the 24th of March. Good as always to have you along. You know, it has been a week in this economy, huh? Less stressful than last week, I would suggest, but still a tad fraught, so we are going to get right to it. Gina Smilek's at the New York Times. Sudeep Reddy is at Politico. Hey, you two.
Hey, Kai.
Hey, so Gina, let's interrogate this whole is there another shoe to drop thing. And I want to talk specifically about banks and how much they are borrowing from the Federal Reserve. You wrote about that this week. They're borrowing a lot. How concerning is that to you?
Yeah, so I think you can take it one of two ways. You can look at it and say, well, they're borrowing an awful lot, and that is clearly a sign of stress. Banks don't just borrow from the Fed, nilly-willy. They do it when they feel like they need to have that cash in the in the bank, so to speak. But I think that the flip side of that is the fact that they are borrowing from the Fed suggests that they're sort of, prepared to take that insurance out, that they're ready to sort of, touch the Fed's discount window, touch the Fed's various programs that it has to serve as sort of a backup to the whole banking system. And that willingness itself could actually help to sort of solidify some confidence in the system and make people convinced that banks are doing what it's necessary, really, to sort of make sure that they don't get themselves into trouble. The big problem would be is if we had a lot of stress and banks were holding off on doing this borrowing, because then we could be in a situation where we get a bunch of bank failures.
Right. Sudeep, explain why banks might not want to go to the discount window or these other Fed facilities.
One word, it's stigma.
Yeah.
You don't want people to hear that you're borrowing at the discount window. You don't want you just don't want anybody to have doubts about your viability as a financial institution. This was the thing 15 years ago during the crisis. The Federal Reserve created just an alphabet soup of new lending programs to essentially deal with the stigma problem of the discount window. Came up with all sorts of other things to essentially cover up and spread around that kind of borrowing.
Mm-hmm.
But this is still a fundamental basic principle of central banking. Walter Bagehot brought it up. This is what central banks do. They're the lender of last resort. They lend freely in a crisis and stem the crisis. And in theory, they avoid extending the crisis. And we've actually seen some positive signs recently that things aren't going completely off the rails. The word we heard over and over this week was that bank deposits may have stabilized. Maybe things aren't going to go completely crazy right now, which is that's good. Let's give it some time. Give the system some time to work. There are other risks out there, of course, but this is a very good sign that now 2 weeks into it, we're not panicking.
Yeah, right now is doing a lot of work. So look, Gina, let me ask you this, and it's a public perception problem. It's sort of the consumer analog of the bank's public perception problem. Both Chair Powell and Secretary Yellen said this week in various ways, look, your deposits are safe. Right? They basically said that verbatim. What they did not say, but what they want people to understand is that your deposits are going to be insured. And they didn't say that because they can't say that, yet they need people to believe that. There's a challenge there.
Yeah. And I think particularly out of Secretary Yellen, we heard some pretty fudgy language because I think she was trying to get around this problem. And so you saw some real whiplash in markets over her various statements this week. But I think it all sort of ties back to this fundamental issue, which is if you talk to most lawyers, they will tell you that the government agencies cannot themselves insure all big deposits on their own. They need to get Congress to pass something to make that happen. Dodd-Frank, after the financial crisis, when Dodd-Frank, the financial reform law passed, they've really tied the hands of the agencies when it comes to doing this. And so you probably need some sort of action by Congress. But at the same time, I don't think the regulators want to go out there and say, we need Congress to do this in order for this to happen, because that could actually really incite some real nervousness among depositors because, you have to trust that Congress will come to some sort of agreement, which doesn't feel like that great of a bet.
Which is a perfect segue to Sudeep Reddy and this next question. I don't know if you can see the Capitol from either your living room window where you're working or the Politico building, but I know you can see that Congress is unlikely to agree on regulatory reforms right now.
Congress is unlikely to agree on anything right now, except throwing stuff at each other and trying to blame another group. And so this is the fundamental challenge that Secretary Yellen has, that Chair Powell, that all of them have. They don't actually have the legal authority to guarantee $18 trillion worth of bank deposits. They don't want to indicate that they do. Then there are no rules, and you're basically declared the end of a form of capitalism as we know it. So they don't want to go that far, and they also don't want to get in trouble because they're not allowed to do that. But they have the responsibility of calming the public, of preventing people from losing their minds and going and pulling all their money out of banks. But they're limited in their power in doing that. And we're going to see all sorts of proposals come up to try to ultimately deal with this, but they're just not there yet.
Yeah. Gina, I want to turn quickly to Chair Powell's press conference this week, in which he said, in this many words, look, we raised 0.25 percentage point, and we didn't have to go more because the banking situation is tightening credit conditions all by itself. He's basically kind of outsourcing, and it seemed happily, this challenge of raising rates.
He's definitely outsourcing it. I'm not sure how happily.
Well, no, I mean, so nobody's wishing for instability in the banking system, but I think he was glad not to have to come out and do 0.5 percentage point.
Yeah, I imagine he probably was. I think that at the end of the day, banks are super important to the economy, and I think that the Fed is looking around at what is happening and saying these banks are much less likely to keep lending, to make big real estate loans, to even make mortgages, and in a world where people are borrowing less, they're also going to be spending less. And that does a lot of the Fed's work for it when it comes to slowing down inflation. And so I think the sort of watchword in Chair Powell's press conference was uncertainty. They don't know how big these effects are. And so I think everything is on and off the table right now. I think they're clearly not, dead set on raising rates again, period. They might be done. They are clearly, thinking about a world in which they don't do anymore, but they're also thinking about a world in which this blows over and they do more. I think they're just not willing to commit in any way at this stage.
Yeah. Okay, a summary question for each of you. There will be different questions. Sudeep, first of all, to my question in the open, do you think there is another banking shoe to drop?
There are definitely going to be more banks that fail in the coming weeks and months. That's a natural course of where we are in the cycle. It's just going to have to happen. I don't know that we necessarily are going to have a raging banking crisis out of this. The other shoes to drop that I would actually be worried about are all the non-regulated entities out there, the investment funds, the players that could be interconnected in some other way. We haven't even talked about those very much. That's the next thing that could be around the corner. And the thing that there are probably people worrying about right now at the Treasury and the Fed. We'll talk about it next week. All right, Gina, the question to you. You have just come out with a book on the history of the Federal Reserve. It is called Limitless. Let me ask you this. Your publisher comes to you and says, hey, Gina, we need an epilogue about the past 2 weeks. What's the general theme?
Ooh, I feel like the general theme actually is the same theme as the overall book, which is the Fed gets really creative and shows what it's capable of doing in moments like this. We've seen the Fed do some pretty interesting things in the last couple of weeks. And I think we're still kind of waiting to see how those play out and how they work and what kind of precedent they set. So, I think it's TBC because I think we're still deeply in the middle of this situation. Yeah. But I think a really interesting legacy of it is going to be, what it means for the Fed's, sort of role as a crisis backstop in American society.
Deeply in the middle. Gina Smilik, The New York Times, Sudeep Reddy at Politico. Thanks, you two.
Thanks, Kai.
Have a nice weekend. On Wall Street today, it was kind of bank schmanks. We'll have the details when we do the numbers. There's a somewhat loaded question that nonetheless kind of has to be asked about the implosion of Silicon Valley Bank. What did banking regulators know about SVB and when did they know it? And also, what did they try to do about it? The Federal Reserve is going to release the results of its in-house investigation into SVB by May the 1st. And a lot of that report is probably going to focus on the role of bank examiners, the rank-and-file employees whose day-to-day job is to keep tabs on any given bank's safety and soundness. So who are those people and what do they do day to day? Here's Marketplace's Matt Levin.
Michael Stevens was a bank examiner for the state of Iowa's banking regulator in the 1990s. He's got a favorite story from those days. A bank he was examining was threatening to foreclose on a commercial property lot.
And I couldn't figure out why the bank was being so aggressive in the collection. Couple payments past due, gets current, goes delinquent again, and all of a sudden the bank is all over the guy.
Stevens did some digging and found the reason on his own, but he wanted to hear the bank's explanation first.
Because we're just tired of dealing with them, and we're going to foreclose, and we're just done dealing with them. And I said, it doesn't have anything to do with this drawing that I found of your new bank building on this lot.
The bank wanted to build its new headquarters on the property it was aggressively foreclosing on. Stevens is now president of the Graduate School of Banking at Colorado, a program that helps train bank examiners. He says the job is different than what you might imagine.
It's not sitting down, going through a bunch of paper, making a decision, and going home. This is an art business, not a science.
Bank examiners work at the Federal Reserve regional banks, the FDIC, the Comptroller of the Currency, and state agencies. It skews younger, with many lower-level examiners recently out of undergrad or grad school. A background in finance is common, but not required. Lee Reiners joined the New York Fed as a bank examiner in the early 2010s, monitoring the likes of J.P. Morgan and Goldman Sachs. He was part of a small battalion of examiners from multiple agencies physically at the bank 4 days a week to look at data in near real time. This was pre-COVID.
So every day you're going to look at how much the bank gained or lost in overall deposits. And you're also going to flag any particularly large deposits, added or withdrawn, from a specific client.
Reiners would also periodically check the composition of depositors. Different types of depositors from different industries would be good. Similar depositors from the same industry vulnerable to the same risks, hello, Silicon Valley Bank, that would be bad. If there was a potential problem, Reiner's first call would typically be to the bank.
If you're a hard ass, right, that's not going to necessarily be productive, but you also can't be someone who is, totally enthralled with the bank and its leadership and, just goes along with everything they say.
If the bank doesn't correct the issue or if the problem is urgent, bank examiners can issue what are called matters requiring attention or the dreaded matters requiring immediate attention. Basically, official warnings telling banks, hey, you got to fix this ASAP. Silicon Valley Bank reportedly received several of those warnings, but you know who didn't get a warning? The depositors. There's a reason for that, says David Cotney, former Massachusetts commissioner of banks.
So the fear is that if the public were to be made aware of an issue, you or I came to the conclusion that, well, there's an issue here. Maybe I'll just go look at another bank. But if everybody decides to do that, it brings down the bank.
In a twist of banking regulation irony, warnings that a bank could be vulnerable to a bank run could trigger a bank run. A lot of what examiners do is reactionary. The bank does something, examiners say, hey, that looks problematic, let's do something about that. Not, hey, don't do that in the first place.
The underlying assumption of regulation is that you are not telling the bank how to act or not act on every single activity. It's still a private market.
A private market that nevertheless seems to consistently need public money to keep from failing. I'm Matt Levin for Marketplace.
The number of new homes sold in this economy was up in February. Third straight month of gains, up just over 1% nationally from the January report, so says the Commerce Department. But really, it's not like there's one giant real estate market in this country, right? That national number hides some big regional differences. Sales were up in the South and West, way down in the Northeast. Marketplace's Justin Ho has more on what's going on there.
Sales are up in the West and especially in the South because that's where most new homes are being built.
The fastest growing cities nationwide are located in the South and West, so builders are responding to that demand.
That's Odetta Kushi, Deputy Chief Economist at First American. She says it's easier for builders to meet that demand in the South in particular because the region's relatively relaxed when it comes to regulations.
Use regulations, density regulations, it's easier to build from a regulatory perspective versus like a Northeast where it tends to be one of the most restrictively regulated regions.
But a bigger issue in the Northeast is that homes there have been getting less and less affordable, whether they're new or existing.
Like, would you buy the house you have today at today's price, at today's rate?
That's Seth Williams, founder of Reference Real Estate, which operates in the Boston area.
My personal mortgage would be probably an extra $3,000 a month based off the cost and the interest. And I can tell you straight up, I wouldn't be buying that house.
As a result, Williams says a lot of builders there are worried people can't afford new homes.
We can only build during these spring, summer, and fall months, which is when we saw the big uptick last year in mortgage rates. So as people were about to maybe put shovels in the ground last spring, maybe they just didn't dig.
Low home prices have been attracting people to the South and the interior West. Charlie Doherty, senior economist at Wells Fargo, says that's heating up those regions' economies.
Because those regions also have seen stronger employment growth, stronger income growth, and that is what's fueling a lot of the positive economic growth in those regions.
That's because when people buy new homes, they end up spending a lot of money in the local economy, too. I'm Justin Ho for Marketplace.
Coming up.
I don't know if it's like when you're going to college and you got to choose a major.
Back to school jitters for the later in life crowd. But first, let's do the numbers. The Dow Industrial is up 132 today, 0.4%, 32,237 for the blue chips. NASDAQ gained 36 points, about 0.3%, 11,823. The S&P 500 up 22 points, 0.5%, 0.5% is another way to say that, 39,070. For the week, the Dow gained 1 2/10%, the NASDAQ up about 1.7%. S&P 500 rose 1 4/10%. Bank shares down yet another day. U.S. Bank dropped 0.4%. Morgan Stanley slid 2 2/10%. J.P. Morgan Chase dipped about 1 5/10%, 1.5%. Another way to say that, Wells Fargo down about 1%. Bond prices up, yields down. 10-year T-note 3.37%. You're listening to Marketplace.
Marketplace is supported by Hint, maker of fruit-infused water with no sugar or diet sweeteners. Available in more than 25 flavors, including watermelon and pineapple. In stores or delivered from hintwater.com.
Hi, I'm Juana Summers. NPR and WLIW-FM work tirelessly together to capture the voices of this community every day. Especially in times of uncertainty, when you listen to WLIW-FM, you're part of the conversation. Make your voice heard right now by supporting WLIW-FM. Give now at WLIW.org/radio.
This is Marketplace. I'm Kai Ryssdal. If you've passed a movie marquee as you've been out and about lately, you've probably seen a whole lot of numbers because there have been at least 3 big sequels released this month. Scream 6, Creed 3, and then today, John Wick Chapter 4, the latest from Keanu Reeves. These are big franchises and could be a kind of a barometer as to whether people are going to keep on going to theaters. Marketplace's Stephanie Hughes went to the movies for us today.
A lot of us have seen all of at least one action movie franchise. Maybe you got invested in the plight of Sarah Connor in Terminator, or just plain hooked on the cars in The Fast and the Furious. The franchise John Notarianni shows up for is John Wick.
It's almost embarrassing to talk about because they are so absurdly violent. You know?
You're going to die. Maybe not.
Goodbye to you. At the same time, the action sequences are so intense, there's like almost something just beautiful about the movement in it.
Notarianni is planning to see John Wick Chapter 4 tonight in Portland, Oregon, where he lives. These kinds of big releases with known characters help get people out in March when they might otherwise hunker down at home. Charles Schrager is a professor of business at NYU in Fordham.
Theater owners would certainly like to keep people in the habit of going to movie theaters.
So having Keanu back in theaters is nice, but the person theater owners really want back is franchise fan John Notarianni. Kathleen Lyon operates 2 movie theaters in Baltimore.
So we need to sell tickets and we need to sell popcorn and we need to have birthday parties and we need all of that stuff to happen, to run a business.
One of Lyon's theaters, The Senator, shows a lot of big releases, and she says its ticket sales are back to pre-pandemic levels. Her other theater, The Charles, shows more art house fare. She says those sales are not back in the same way. So maybe there should be a sequel to Everything Everywhere All at Once with a guest appearance from Sarah Connor. I'd give it a shot. I'm Stephanie Hughes for Marketplace.
Most of the time, and probably for most people, college is thought of as a place where you go to somehow turn yourself into an adult and ideally get yourself ready for a working life. More and more, those schools are offering programs to people at the other end of the career spectrum. Adults in their 50s and their 60s who might have finished one career and aren't ready to retire yet. And it makes financial sense for schools to go after that market. Fewer 18-year-olds are enrolling in college, while the number of people over 50 is growing, and they have often got money to spend. Ashley Milne-Tyte reports.
Last year, Terry Harrington was at an impasse. She's lived in Denver and practiced law there for decades. At 66 and divorced, she was torturing herself with questions about her future. Keep working in the business she founded? Move to live near her son and grandkids?
I don't know if it's like when you're going to college, you got to choose a major, but it is an unsettling feeling to not really know what the remainder of your life looks like or what you want to do with it when you have that choice.
Then Harrington spotted a Facebook ad for a new program called Changemakers at the University of Colorado, Denver. It's aimed at professionals at or near the end of their careers who want to repurpose their energies for what some people call their encore phase of life. Harrington is now part of the program's inaugural class of 17.
I cannot tell you how much I have learned about people my age, the processes they go through, the options they have.
Once a week, the class features guest speakers over Zoom. This week, it's author and Yahoo Finance columnist Carrie Hannon.
You know, I've had a really fun career myself, lots of jigs and jags. And
At one point, student Margie Yavara, a former accountant who now wants to develop affordable housing, asks Hannon about business incubators.
And I'm wondering if there might be any that might be geared toward folks going toward their encore career, maybe.
Yeah, I love that. I don't know if I wrote about any in the book, but I do have a couple I could point you to. I'm happy to.
CU Denver's program is part-time. A semester costs $3,200. More established programs, including Stanford's and Harvard's, are full-time, run for a whole academic year, and cost at least $50,000. Some smaller schools say they'd like to start encore career programs, but they're a risk, says Mark Canada, Chancellor of Indiana University, Kokomo.
We need to invest in the future, but it's not something we can just jump into feet first because it's an investment of time and of staff and, frankly, of money.
He says in his region, there's limited interest in these midlife programs. For now. Still, he says,
within 10 years, I would be really surprised if there weren't hundreds or maybe even thousands of universities who are doing this.
Because he says there are so many older adults who want to keep learning. Bernard Franklin is one of them. A longtime university administrator from Kansas, he's now 69. After losing his wife to cancer, he spent 2 tumultuous decades parenting 4 kids and working right up until 2021.
Without a break, without stopping to say, what is it I want to do?
Last year, he was a fellow on Harvard's Encore program called the Advanced Leadership Initiative. Even after a career on a campus, he initially felt out of place.
Harvard wasn't created for an African-American man. And I'm taking in all of the enormity of what that means.
But he says exchanging ideas with other fellows and immersing himself in classwork helped him get past that. One class in particular was about reflecting on your personal and professional life so far to help you decide what to do next.
I wouldn't have had that had Harvard not given me an opportunity to step back and to really begin to see that my story has my future purpose in it as well.
Franklin now leads a Boston nonprofit called Uncornered, which helps youth involved in gangs get out of a cycle of violence through education. Franklin's dad is 92. His grandfather lived to 104. With so much of life ahead, he says, he'll give back for as long as he can. I'm Ashley Milne-Tite for Marketplace.
This final note on the way out today, in which the big banks, it seems, are taking pity on smaller banks. Reuters reports this week that executives at JP Morgan and Citigroup and Bank of America are putting out the word not to poach people from banks that might be having troubles. JP Morgan, for instance, and this is from a memo that Reuters says it has seen, they say, quote, "We should never give the appearance of exploiting a situation of stress or uncertainty. We do not make disparaging comments regarding competitors," end of quote. Yeah, we'll see how long that lasts.
Marketplace is supported by Alteryx. Alteryx enables anyone to make better data-driven decisions and believes in the power of analytics for all. Learn more at alteryx.com.
All right, on the way out, here's your moment of economic context. A quick check on oil, often, as you know, a convenient gauge of where things might be headed, very macroeconomically. The global benchmark, Brent North Sea, about $75 a barrel today. Here is the context for that. That's down about 9% since SVB went under. Our theme music was composed by BJ Liederman. Marketplace's executive producer is Nancy Fargali. Donna Tam is the executive editor. Neil Scarborough is the vice president and general manager. I'm Kai Rizal. Have a good weekend, everybody. Have a great weekend. How about that? We'll be back on Monday. This is APM.
Hi, I'm Gianna.